All right, welcome back. Hey, as we begin Unit 3, I want to first talk about just kind of what we're going to look at in general. We're only going to cover the first two lessons right now. Lesson 1 will be about photosynthesis, and then later on, Lesson 2, we'll talk about another process that takes place in your cells called cellular respiration. Now, I'm hoping that you're familiar with photosynthesis. It should be something that you've learned about in the past, but we're going to go ahead and get started with Unit 3. Lesson 1, Exploration 1. Now, this particular exploration is going to be more of a general summary of photosynthesis, and then in Exploration 2, we'll look at the actual processes that take place in a plant cell that carry out this conversion of light energy into chemical energy. So, here we go. In photosynthesis, it's important that we identify the specific type of organism that can perform this process, and we call those organisms producers. Another name you might hear later on is called an autotroph. But a producer is any organism that can capture light energy and turn it into chemical energy that cells can use for their cell processes. Now, the type of chemical energy that's going to be created is something called sugar. Now, you've heard of sugar before, but specifically glucose. When we talk about this process, we're going to be talking about how light energy is converted into a sugar molecule called glucose. This is what we are able to acquire when we eat plants. It's what other organisms are able to acquire when they eat plants. But it's all about acquiring this chemical energy that plants make using energy from the sun. All right, so let's talk about a couple other things, how they do it. I want you to make sure you have this in your notes because this is a pretty good diagram. So first of all, plants use light energy to produce sugars, which are a form of chemical energy. Chemical energy just means energy that can be stored. In this case, when the panda eats the plant matter, it obtains energy from the sugars in the leaves and uses this energy for cell processes and growth. Now you can check your work. Sure enough, we got them all right, which is great. I would keep that in your notes so that you can reference that again. That's a pretty nice little guide for how this works. All right. When we model photosynthesis, it's important that we understand how this actually takes place in your cells. All right, first of all, photosynthesis literally means making something out of light. Synthesis is to make. And whenever there's a photo at the beginning, that is referencing light. Okay. In our ecosystems, this is a very, very important process because there is gas exchange that takes place, there is energy conversion that takes place. All of these things are very important to life on Earth. There would not be life on Earth if it wasn't for this process. If plants couldn't harness energy from the sun and turn it into chemical energy that we can use, and if they didn't filter out carbon dioxide to create oxygen, then the types of life that exist on the Earth would currently not be possible. Now, we can model this in a couple different ways, but one way that we're going to model it quite a bit is through a chemical equation. I've highlighted that chemical equation right here. As you can see, on the reactant side of this process, we have CO2 and we have H2O. Now there's 6 in front of both of those. You'll learn more about the importance of balancing equations when you get to chemistry. But for right now, what I want you to focus on is the actual molecules that are involved. So on the reactant side, we have carbon dioxide and we have water. Now those two ingredients are combined and rearranged using energy from the sun to make 6 oxygens and 1 large molecule right here. Now this large molecule right here is that sugar molecule called glucose. C6H12O6 is glucose. Now I've got this highlighted as one piece, but you might highlight them each individually and then make a note to talk about how this is carbon dioxide, this is water, this is oxygen, and this is glucose. Now, oxygen isn't really something that the plant is trying to make. The oxygen product is basically released as a waste product that the plants don't need and really don't even want. They're really more concerned with the carbon dioxide and the water. Now, we are going to come back to this equation quite a bit, so you're going to want to make sure you have that in your notes. You might want to write it down somewhere, but it's very important that you're familiar with this equation. We'll reference it quite a bit. All right, let's talk about the specific type of light energy that's used in this reaction. Now, light is just a form of energy that falls into the scale of the electromagnetic spectrum. Everything from gamma rays all the way to radio waves. Now, in that electromagnetic spectrum, there is what we call the visible light spectrum. This is the portion of light that we as humans can actually see. This is that rainbow section right here. And as you can see, it fits right in between that UV section and infrared section. All right. Now, the visible light scale goes all the way from violet all the way to red. And plants can absorb different wavelengths of light along this scale, but they don't actually absorb them all. You might think that plants, well, they're green, so they must absorb the green wavelengths. And that's actually not true. The type of light that plants can absorb is everything except for the green. The reason for this is that the way light works is that light is reflected by the same color and it's absorbed by everything else. So in plants, we have these chloroplast pigments. We have these chloroplast organelles that have pigments inside of them. Remember, we talked about chloroplasts back when we talked about parts of a cell. So this kind of looks at a chloroplast a little bit more specifically. Inside of a chloroplast, you have these stacks. They look like little stacks of green coins. All right. Each of those coins is called a thylakoid. All right. So you have these stacks of thylakoids. All right. The portion of the chloroplast that is outside of those stacks of thylakoids, but inside of the overall chloroplast, is called the stroma. Now we'll talk more about this in our next exploration, but I just want to make you aware of some basic chloroplast structures. The thylakoids are these stacks. The stroma is the space inside of the chloroplast, but outside of those stacks. And the stacks are what contain the pigment. Okay, chloroplasts have a green pigment, which basically allows them to absorb every part of the visible light spectrum except for green light. That's what they reflect. That's what our eyes see. That's why they look green. All right, let's move on. Again, different types of chlorophyll absorb different types of light. The only one that's not absorbed is green. And then we'll finish up with this piece. All right. There are other types of producers, and we're not going to talk a lot about them. One other type of producer is called a chemosynthetic producer. These types of producers don't use light energy. They use other types of energy, usually in the ocean floor, to make sugars. We're not going to talk much about that. I highlighted it so that you could have that note that chemosynthesis is another way of making energy, but realistically, I'm not as concerned that you know this part.